nice.
Now, if you're looking to take your bike's performance to the next level, then a set of progressive fork springs with preload adjusters might be the setup that you just need for your bike. Now, installing this setup doesn't just change the comfort of the bike, it actually changes the way the bike responds and handles on the road. So if you want to know a little bit more, stick around, because I'm going to take you through the full installation process of how to get started. And of course we're doing this on the Street Twin, but this same principle and same process can also be applied to your bike. So let's get started. So let's take a look at the kit. Now inside you get a pair of progressive fork springs and a pair of anodised alloy preload adjusters and a couple of washers and spacers. What you'll notice straight away is that the preload adjusters are longer than the stock fork caps and that the new springs are just slightly longer too. Now the washers are a little bit thicker and the spacers are shorter, but altogether the finished product is near on the same length. So the first step is to jack the bike up from underneath, and if you haven't got a motorbike jack, then a regular car jack will do, with a plank of wood to spread the weight. Now you're aiming to lift that front wheel just off the ground. Now we do this because the fork caps are under pressure from the springs, and by raising that front end we take the weight off of those forks, which helps to relieve the pressure. Now that makes it easier when we're removing and refitting the caps later on. It also means that you won't be fighting against the spring tension when you start to undo them, which could result in those fork caps going flying. Now once the front end's raised, the next step is to remove the handlebars, which gives clear access to those fork caps. On the Street Twin, all you have to do is simply undo these 4 bolts on the handlebar clamp and lift the bars out the way. Remember though, use some towels over the tank and clocks to protect the bike. Now that the fork caps are fully exposed, we can easily get access with a socket or spanner to remove them. As you'll see here, once I start to undo the cap, there's a small pop, and that's just the spring pressure releasing. Even though we've taken most of the tension off by lifting the front of the bike, there's still a little bit of pressure left in the fork. One point I would add is to think about using a piece of material over these fork caps, which would help to reduce any damage. Definitely don't use any form of mole grips for this job, as the soft alloy marks really easily. With the fork cap removed, you'll see this plastic spacer tube, which can now also be removed. I'm removing everything slowly and giving it a little tap, as we're not changing the oil during this job, so we want to keep as much of it as possible inside the forks. I'll also use a rag to catch any small drips. Next, I'm using a small magnet to carefully lift out the washer and then the original spring. Take your time here and remove the spring really slowly, as that loves to gather loads of oil around each of those coils. Again, this helps to prevent any unnecessary oil loss, because we want to keep as much of that as possible. Finally, make sure to remember the order that everything came out in. I lay everything out on a workbench, which helps when it comes to refitting, because when we install the new parts, we'll be putting everything back together in the exact reverse order. Now it's time to fit the new progressive fork springs. As you can see, the top of the spring has coils that are wound much tighter together, while the bottom has wider spacing. That design is what gives these springs their progressive feel. To install them, simply drop each spring into the fork tube and let it settle naturally to the bottom. In the kit, you'll find 2 washers. You want the thicker washer to sit on top of the spring. Simply drop it into the tube so it sits flush. Next, take the new spacer tube and place that on top. You'll notice it sits quite high in the fork tube, and that's completely normal. Remember, there's still a little bit of that spring tension inside, which is exactly why we raised that front end earlier. Lifting the bike reduces the pressure on these components, making it much easier when refitting the new fork caps. Lastly, add the thinner washer on top of the spacer tube before we add the new preload adjusters, which replace our old fork caps. As you can see, I've wound the preload adjuster all the way out. Doing this helps to reduce that spring pressure when refitting. I've also reused the rubber O-ring seal from the original fork caps to ensure that I get a proper seal on the fork tube. But if your O-ring is damaged or worn, make sure to replace it with a new one. Now the threads on the fork caps are very fine, so tighten these adjusters by hand, as you don't want to be forcing them down under tension, as that can easily lead to cross-threading these caps and damaging the fork tubes. Finally, Use the spanner to nip up that tension, but don't go crazy as these are alloy parts. So preload is basically how much the spring is compressed before you even sit on the bike. Now it lets you fine tune the suspension for your weight, riding style and setup. Changing the preload can also subtly change your steering geometry. When the adjusters are wound out, you reduce the preload. This means that the front of the bike sits a little bit lower. That then steepens the rake angle, which makes the bike turn quicker and feel more agile, which is perfect for twisty roads. When the adjusters are wound in, you add preload. This raises the front end slightly and relaxes that rake angle, giving a more stable, slower steering feel, which is ideal for longer rides or high-speed stability. So to sum it up, for a responsive, more sharper setup, you want to wind those adjusters out. And when you want to relax it off a little bit and take things a little bit more leisurely, wind them in a few turns. So these springs are progressive, which means they have tighter coils at one end and wider space coils at the other. The theory says the tighter coils compress more easily, so they absorb the smaller bumps and imperfections in the road, giving a smoother, more comfortable ride. Now the second part of the progression is when you push the bike, like when you're braking hard or leaning into a corner. That's when those tighter coils close up first, leaving the wider spaced ones to do more of the hard work, becoming firmer and more controlled when you need it most. And that's what gives you that progressive feel, soft over the little stuff and firm when it counts. In my next video, I'll be sharing my full review of these progressive fork springs and preload adjusters by Tech Bike Parts. This kit cost £139, and although the job is fairly straightforward, I'll be putting this new setup to the test and asking what difference have they actually made in the ride and performance, and is this kit really worth the time, money and effort? So I hope you found this video helpful, especially if you're thinking about upgrading your suspension and doing the job yourself. What I'd really like to know is, have you already done the job? Did you hit any issues, or would you have done something differently? And what brand did you opt for? Please do leave your comments in the box below. As I always say, these videos act as a great resource for people that are looking to upgrade or do the job themselves, and your comments really do help people make those decisions. Now if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, you can do so by clicking the button below, and if you click the bell icon, that will keep you updated on all the latest releases on the channel. Thanks for watching, and in the meantime, safe riding, safe driving, happy adventures, and I'll see you in the next one.